I call Amy Adams.
Mr Speaker, it's actually been a little while since I've risen to take a call in this House, and I'm just sort of sitting here hoping that it's a bit like riding a bike and I'll remember how to do it. But, sir, it is an interesting time to take a call tonight on the Taxation, International Investment and Remedial Matters Bill, and I think the first trick with this piece of legislation is not to get confused with the Taxation, International Taxation, Life Insurance and Remedial Matters Act, which of course went through the House earlier on last year, is now law, and I can tell Mr Robertson how much I enjoyed sitting through the FEC committee when we worked through the detail of that bill, and in actual fact, the process of working through that earlier bill, I think, is certainly quite helpful for me in framing the debate around this piece of legislation, because it looked actually at the same core issues that this bill is addressing, which is in essence the proper way that we tax in New Zealand interest and both passive and active from foreign-owned entities. And so with that bill, the Select Committee worked through the process and saw the wisdom of moving away from the old grey list test by which we exempted income earned in certain qualifying countries, but were very sort of unfair and unclear as to how everything else was taxed. And we moved instead to a much simpler test where the revenue instead would look at whether the income was actively earned in that company, whether they were actively trading, in which case it made sense to put them on a similar footing to local countries in that jurisdiction, or where, sir, that revenue was earned on a passive basis, in which case fairness suggested that it should be taxed here in New Zealand according to New Zealand rules. And that, sir, made sense to the committee. It was subsequently passed by this House, and as far as I know, it's working very well. And so with this bill before us tonight, sir, we now see the extension of that regime out to non-CFC foreign entities owned by New Zealand residents. And on the face of it, that seems to make a lot of sense to me, but of course we'll have to work through, if this House approves the first reading tonight, of course, we'll have to work through in Select Committee exactly what impacts that will have, why they were originally left out of the regime, and what any unforeseen aspects of that might be. Two other matters, sir, I just want to touch on very quickly in my contribution tonight. One of those is around the changes to the thin capitalisation rules, which are probably a little known sort of pointy-headed aspect of taxation law, but actually rather important. And so this bill does propose changes to the thin capitalisation rules for non-residents, and one of those important changes is providing an alternative test, which just on the face of it does seem to be a very sensible alternative, allowing an assessment of interest expenditure as a proportion of income for the non-state-owned banks. So that seems to make a lot of sense in ensuring those thin capitalisation rules work well. But again, I'll be very interested to hear from officials and submitters as we work through the process as to the impact of that. The final point I wanted to pick up, and really it's just straight, looking back into the dark old ages. In reading through the explanatory notes, sir, I saw reference to the Stamp and Cheque Duties Act 1971, which I've got to say in the early days of practising, and Minister Wilkinson will remember those days when we had to collect stamp and cheque duty on all conveyances. And I was surprised, sir, actually to see that it was still terribly active. But yes, indeed, we have a requirement under that Act that for approved issuers, there is an exemption from non-resident withholding tax, and that the rate for those approved issuer levies is set under that Stamp and Cheque Duties Act. Under this bill, that would see that reduced from the current rate of 2% to a robust rate of 0%. So very pleased to see that my old friend, the Stamp and Cheque Duties Act, still breathes life. And again, sir, I'll be very interested in talking to officials about how reducing that rate down to 0% will affect the situation. So, sir, I do support the bill. It seems to be a sensible extension of the regime previously approved by this House. But, of course, until we hear from submitters, until we work through the process, we won't know exactly how that will apply. But at this stage, sir, I'm very happy to commend the bill at this stage to Select Committee. Thank you.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
Mr Speaker, I seek leave of the House to table the speech by the Honourable Peter Dunn on the 23rd of July 2008 on the Taxation, International Taxation, Life Insurance and Remedial Matters Bill, the same speech Jonathan Coleman gave at the start of this first reading.
No, I can't accept that because it's already in Hansard. So.
Twice.
Well, I think you've made your point. Members, this debate is concluded. The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary will say no. The ayes have it.